Ember Witch. Book 1. The Lich. Volume 1. Black Tragedy. Chapter 4. Black Tragedy. September 19, 459 BME to October 31, 461 BME. Fragment 29. Hunted. Fevre and Hana made their way to the edge of the evergreen forest and stopped. The dense fog holding its place just feet before them.
So how do we get in? The stories always state that the fog is impenetrable,
Hana asked as she stepped forward, reaching her hand out to feel the cool air.
There is a specific path that leads through the forest, however you must use your color to locate it,
Fevre said, then pulled his aura around himself. He stepped forward and pushed out his energy, splitting the fog apart. He walked forward into the forest. Hana followed close behind him. Syrya woke up in a haze. She had been having a hard time getting to sleep the past few weeks, so she was tired and groggy. She stood up and grabbed the bottle of cetraberry and Haven stem potion she had continued to brew up and chugged the entire thing. She loved the buzz she got from it. It helped her relax and take her mind off the ever-growing stress. It had been over a year since she had burned the page of the Narcosis, and she had been put in charge of the baptisms of all those who needed them. She was curious about how the Black family was doing and how Lilith was doing in particular. For some reason, she still couldn't get that kiss out of her mind. She slipped her robe on, not even bothering to put her underwear on under it. She had always been loosely following the dress code of the church, not to be disrespectful of the church, but she just hated being bogged down by rules and regulations. She was after all here on behalf of the elven branch of the church, and the elves were a lot less strict about dress and behavior in the church. Her mother was the one who assigned her to this church after she had fallen in love with a human, so it was only natural for her to take after the elvish traditions. She walked out the door and checked in on the blond man, still comatose, in the room across the hall from hers. He was sleeping soundly, so she began her regular routine of care for him. She was lifting his right leg up and stretching it out when the man made a strange noise. She stopped moving it and waited for a moment. He grumbled something, and she set his leg down. She came close to his face to hear if he was saying something, and he grumbled again. Syrya placed her hand on his forehead to check for any signs of a fever, and when she felt nothing, she focused her energy into his body. His bones had healed and his internal bleeding had stopped. He grumbled again, but didn't say anything, so she let him rest. She left the room and began her day as she always had. Breakfast, pray, baptize, lunch, pray, meditation, dinner, pray, then sleep. She had gotten used to the routine, but she wanted something more to do. She longed for another page of the Narcosis to appear, so she had an excuse to study magic again. She already had learned all she could about the gemstone she wore around her neck. It was an amplifier, an object mages of old would use to cast powerful spells, but at the cost of some of their life force. No other magical objects had surfaced since she had met with that rum brewer, so she was stuck with mundane objects. Eve had still been having nightmares, and they were more frequent in the past month than they ever had been. The images she had seen the day the page was destroyed still flooded her mind. She had been trying to wait a little longer to write to the church, but it was beginning to be far too much for her to handle. She wrote out all of her symptoms since the day they had left the chapel, then passed a blank page to her kids.
I'm writing the church. We need to report the symptoms we have had the past year. Please be truthful and explain as best as you can,
Eve said, folding her page up and placing it on the table. Lilith was ecstatic.
We get to talk to Syrya?
She asked with extreme excitement, so much that she actually squeaked. She grabbed the blank paper from her mother's hand and ran to her room. She started out the letter addressing the strange things she had felt over the year, black figures in the night, a new recurring dream about a giant wolf and a small girl, trembling in shivers like the air was below freezing in the summer heat, and oddly enough a few times she could see her breath. She then went off topic to confess that she had been thinking about Syrya every day since they left the church. She tried to put it as delicately as she could that she had fantasized about meeting again and going on some grand magical adventure with her, but halfway through the sentence she scribbled out what she was writing, thinking it would be too much embarrassment. She reworded it to say something along the lines that she wanted to see her again but kept enough of her emotions out of it. Aries explained that her symptoms hadn't been more than an occasional feeling of fear when looking at the moon. She wrote about how she remembered the colors of the fire and went into great detail about how the pink and purple hues danced together with the black and silver fire like a beautiful play. She hadn't gotten too far into her letter before she got a headache and an image of a giant sword bathed in black smoke flashed through her mind. She wrote this experience down as quickly as she could, in the process spilling the ink. She cleaned it up as best as she could, then concluded the letter with a small signature. Lilith ran into the kitchen and handed her mother the letter, sealed with a hastily made wax circle.
What's with the seal?
Eve asked quizzically.
It's a secret only Syrya can read,
she replied with a smile. Eve smiled back and nodded.
All right, I understand, no peeking from me. Aries, are you almost finished?
She said, placing both letters together on the table.
Yes, Mom.
Aries replied, walking into the room with ink-covered fingers. She handed her letter to her mother and sat down at the table.
Mom, I saw something just now. I saw a giant sword.
Did you write it down?
Eve asked immediately after her daughter finished speaking.
Yes, it was just a flash image, but it was so vivid. My head hurts now,
Aries said in reply, trying to get rid of the pain in her mind.
I'll get these sent off immediately. Go lay down, sweetheart. Have Lily make you some tea. You will feel better in an hour or so,
Eve said, getting up. She leaned over and kissed her daughter on the forehead, then walked out of the house. Dara had been tracking the half-blood throughout the city of Meridia for 2 weeks. She had to travel by night across the rooftops so as to not be seen by anyone. She wasn't going to risk alerting any human to her presence until she was entirely sure she could reliably get the location of her target. She knew that this Syrya would be a healer for the church, however the city had nearly 100 separate chapels within the 200 miles the city spanned. Without knowing exactly how the city was laid out and the direct locations of each chapel, she was forced to listen in on hundreds of conversations a day, hoping that one of them would reveal the location of the elf. To her frustration, the humans never referred to a single location whenever they spoke of the elven healer. Instead, only speaking of the chapel. Perhaps the religion within the human kingdom was different than that of myopia. It was possible that instead of the chapels being referred to in a plural sense, but an individual sense, the church could be considered as a single entity instead of a collective. This would mean that this Syrya woman could be traveling the city and treating the humans at each individual church. She knew that from the letter the city had been constructing a new chapel at the time Syrya had returned to the mainland several years back, but she was utterly lost. The entire city seemed to be a nightmare of unfinished and half-destroyed buildings. It had been a headache to navigate through the constant construction sites due to the crews who were assigned to work during the night. She was watching over a small section of the city, hoping that she would finally get a hint at where this elven would be. As she leaned over the edge of the roof she was sitting on, she began feeling a twinge of magic just out of her reach. She scanned the streets attempting to locate this source of color. It was far too small to be anything more than a residue left over from a much stronger spell, however she wasn't going to let this lead slip through her fingers. She watched the crowds of people attempting to point out the exact location of this color.
You won't believe it. I sold my entire keg to the healer,
a drunk man said as he wobbled his way across the street. He was oddly enough holding the lid to a cask in his hands as he fumbled about.
You already told me that, Gerald. Go home and get some rest,
another person said, and the drunk man cursed, then began stumbling down the street. Dara watched him make his way down the streets, following close behind him on the roof-tops. After around 20 minutes, he tripped over the step of a door, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a key. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. As Vera approached the home, she felt 2 sources of magic. They were still small, but they felt strong enough to get her mind racing about what they could be attached to. She waited for an hour until the sun was beginning to set, then dropped into the alley between the drunk man's house and a larger building. She tracked the magic around the building, finding a latch to a cellar. She knelt down and pulled her lock-pick from her pocket, then popped open the latch. As she stepped down the stairs, the color touched her mind stronger than when she first felt it. She snuck around the cellar and she came across a rack of rum and wine bottles. She examined them, keeping herself from taking one. She walked up to the casks that sat next to and on the rack and ran her hands across the rough wood. She finally understood why the color had been so weak when she first detected it, due to the magical residue each held. She took a deep breath and made her way to the stairs that would lead up into the house and listened to the man stumbling around. She heard him grab a bottle from somewhere over her and she waited for him to sit. Gerald was sitting on his chair, drunk off his ass. He hadn't expected his newest rum to be this strong, but he wasn't complaining. The mage that gave him this new cask was far more talented than the mage he had met years ago. The strength of this rum was enough to prove it. He tipped another shot into his mouth and swallowed, feeling a deep but cold burn as it went down. From the corner of his eye he caught a shadow moving but paid no mind to it as he couldn't move without the risk of falling over. He heard a board creaking behind him and before he could muster a single word a blade was at his throat.
"I see you've taken to getting plastered, gods you stink,"
a sinister voice said directly into his ear. Gerald felt a slight tickle on his cheek.
"I understand you've been in contact with an elven mage, am I right?"
The voice said, letting the knife loosen on his throat so he could speak, but still pressed with enough force to cause irritation.
"Yes, I gave her a cask of rum and she repaid me with another cask,"
Gerald said calmly, but with slurs so deep he could barely pronounce the words.
"Where is she now?"
the voice asked.
"Ask the church, I haven't seen her in a year,"
Gerald slurred again.
"Damn the church and damn you,"
the voice said in disgust.
"I agree, my friend,"
he slurred.
"Nothing good comes from the church,"
he continued.
"I'm willing to spare your life tonight, but I'm also craving the sweet smell of blood. You play along and you live,"
the voice said in Gerald's ear. There was that tickle again.
"Bring the elf to me, tonight at the grey dawn."
The knife left his throat and the dark presence disappeared. Gerald rubbed his throat, poured another shot and chugged it down. Syrya was finally done with her day and was resting on her bed. She drank 2 full bottles of Cetra berry and Haven stem potion and had been feeling rather exhausted. She let the high rush over her and the room began to spin. She hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in weeks, so she was ready to pass out tonight. She closed her eyes and let her body relax. She hadn't been like this for 5 minutes before she felt a strange but familiar sense crash against her entire body. She shot out of bed, grabbed her robe, slipped it on in a rush and sped out the door. She reached the door of the chapel and flung it open to see a drunk and stumbling man fumbling his way up the stairs. She ran to him and propped him up on her shoulder.
"What in the void are you doing?"
she asked, walking him up the stairs and into the chapel.
"I was told to get you. Someone needs to see you at the grey dawn,"
the drunk man slurred out.
"By the gods, it couldn't wait until you sobered up. What on Haven did you drink? It smells like you bathed in one of your casks,"
Syrya asked as she placed him down on a chair.
"They said they would kill me if I didn't get you tonight, and funny you should ask, you made the damn thing after all,"
he said in a rushed manner.
"Well, that explains why I could feel you coming from the stairs, but who is going to kill you?"
she replied, trying to keep the conversation on the immediate danger.
"Don't know," had a distinct sound to their voice that I hadn't heard since I went east. Even felt a tickle on my cheek when they spoke into my ear,
he said, getting comfortable on the chair.
An Eastern accent and a tickle must have been a fire end, but what in the void is one doing here?
Syrya thought.
You stay here, my room is through this door, please get some sleep, you're far too drunk to go back home,
she said, then walked down the hall.
Father, there is an issue that has arisen. I must leave. A man is out at the entrance. Please make sure he gets into my bed and sleeps,"
she said, barging into his room.
What kind of issue?
He asked, surprised.
"I'm not quite sure yet. I will return as soon as I can,"
she said, leaving quickly. Syrya made her way to the shady part of the city, turning down several alleys, arriving at a rundown building with a destroyed sign that read "The Grey Dawn." She pulled her hood down and opened the door, walking in slowly. She scanned the room and noticed several people staring at her, some with disgust and others with puzzlement. She sat at the bar and asked for a drink of water.
"Odd seeing someone like you in these parts, a woman, a priest and an elf, no doubt,"
the bartender said, pouring water into a small glass.
"Not a place for any of those things. I'd suggest leaving before something happens. Don't want to see a pretty thing like you end up in the ground,"
he continued.
"I can handle myself, thank you,"
Syrya replied, knowing the good intentions in his words even if he said it with a tinge of disrespect. The bartender shrugged and turned away.
"It's your funeral."
She sat there for a few minutes before she felt it. She calmed her thoughts and moved with speed to the right as a red spike jumped through the bar. She picked up the drink, turned in a flash and chucked the glass. It smashed into the wall and she cursed as she had thought the mage would have been directly behind her. She spun as another spike came through the floor.
"Well, I wanted excitement,"
she thought to herself, preparing a counterspell. Another 3 spikes came through the door and bar as she dodged each. The crowd was small, only around 6 people and each a human, so none of them could be the one using magic. She looked up into the rafters and spotted exactly what she expected. A glowing red silhouette crouched down in a perfect balance. She flung a black thread towards the figure while screaming for everyone to get out. The crowd didn't move, however. In fact, no one had moved since the first spell was cast. The thread hit the ceiling and burst into several projectiles, scattering in all directions. The red figure got hit by a few of them and dropped to the floor, landing on its feet. The low light from the burning candles illuminated the figure. A sleek feminine body accentuated by animal-like features, all leading to an animal head. Covered head to foot in a skin-tight black and gray bodysuit with a black hood covering most of its head except for a reddish-orange muzzle.
"Who are you?"
Syrya asked, bringing her hand up, letting a black flame form. The figure didn't speak, instead they summoned a red transparent knife. It jumped into action, rushing at Syrya, and she flung the flame, hitting the floor at its feet. She dodged several swipes and countered others, studying her attacker's moves and magic. The figure kicked at her knee, and Syrya flipped onto a table, then spun off of it, flinging a black dart of magic at the figure. Their bodies, glowing with magic, left a lingering light behind with each move they made. Syrya's attempts at range attacks were countered by the attacker's quick movements. She wasn't a conjuration expert, but she quickly summoned a black mass into her hand, deflecting an attack. The two clashed several times before her attacker jumped back, throwing several darts at her. She countered with a shield spell and quickly retaliated with her own ranged attack. She flung a massive black fireball towards the attacker. It landed, throwing the figure into the wall with a huge crash as they broke through the wood and outside. Using the time she quickly scanned the room, checking if anyone had been injured. 5 of the patrons had been knocked to the floor but unhurt, while the bartender was frozen in place behind the bar, attempting to pick up an axe from a shelf. Relieved to see no one had died, she jumped outside in pursuit. The figure had already stood up and summoned a long red sword and several darts that circled it, ready to fire them at any moment. Syrya threw up a shield and prepared a fireball.
You've got some skills, Elf. I'm glad my first half-elven kill isn't a pushover.
The figure finally spoke with a thick accent.
Viren Nicole,
she said as Syrya was about to speak.
She knows Elvish?
Syrya thought.
I see that you have been educated on my language. Are you some sort of assassin?
Syrya asked, ignoring the insult the hooded woman had thrown at her.
I know many things. I also know that there is a price on that horned head of yours.
The animal-like woman said, sneering her sharp teeth as she finished.
Tell me what it is that put a bounty on me,
Syrya said, keeping her guard up.
You know exactly why.
The figure said back, not letting too much information out.
All I've done since I arrived in this city is heal those in need. I have done nothing to inherit such a bounty,
Syrya replied.
That doesn't matter. I'm told to kill, so I kill,
the woman said, and sprung into action. Syrya focused her shield directly to her arm to deflect a sword slash and flung the fireball at the same time as her attacker shot a dart at her. The fireball slammed into the dart and exploded, flinging black embers all over. Syrya guarded herself from a few more slashes and whipped a black thread around the woman's leg, pulling it and making her fall to the ground. The red blade dissipated into the air. The woman kicked at Syrya and jumped back up, flinging 2 darts out. She extended her shield, but too late, and a dart pierced her shoulder, causing her to drop the shield entirely. She screamed in pain as a dark red burn grew on her shoulder. Her arm went numb and she could barely move it, so she summoned a small black sphere and tossed it toward the animal-like female. It extended and hit the woman, exploding in smoke on impact. Syrya rushed forward, slamming her palm into the woman's face, casting a fireball. The black fire wrapped around the woman's head, burning away the hood. The woman flew back, but caught herself before she fell. In the moonlight, Syrya got a good look at her attacker's face.
I was right about you, a Fyren, and a highly trained one at that. Not too often that your kind comes around these parts,
Syrya said, keeping her injured arm at her side while holding another fireball in her other hand.
I can say the same thing about you, elf. Did your gracious king send you to prepare for his inevitable invasion?
The Fyren snarled. Her fox-like features, now visible in the bright moonlit street, silhouetted by her red aura that glowed around her like blood.
I'm not sure what you mean. I've lived on the mainland my entire life. I was tasked to be the healer by my mother, who herself was tasked by the church to help and attend to the people of Valsilla,
Syrya said, letting her flame grow larger.
I see, even you are unaware of your king's intentions. I assure you that this is the case. I heard it directly from your mother. That's right, your dear mother and father were slain just a month ago,
the Fyren woman said with an evil grin.
Your father was my first victim. Poor half-elf, you're all alone in this world now,
she continued.
You bitch,
Syrya yelled, throwing the fireball. The Fyren sidestepped the spell, shooting off another dart, hitting Syrya in the leg. She summoned another red sword as Syrya fell to her knees with tears in her eyes.
Skilled with healing, yet you haven't used a single healing spell on yourself. Are you trying to die?
She asked, stepping towards Syrya, preparing for the kill. Syrya didn't say anything. Instead, she let her emotions take over as tears streamed down her cheeks.
An elf dies tonight and I dine like a queen tomorrow,
the Fyren said, swinging the blade down towards Syrya's neck.